Well, Tina Tchen, thank you so much for making the time to speak with us.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you again, Zinclay.
Yeah, so glad we can talk. And so, for those who don't know, you are the president and CEO of Time's Up Now and the Time's Up Foundation. You also co founded the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. You're a former assistant to President Barack Obama, executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls. I think when people hear your many accomplishments and accolades, they may assume that you just started here. You started on top, quote unquote. But can you maybe walk us through your journey? I know you began the streets of Chicago as an organizer. Talk to us about that and how you've remained centered on the work of gender equity and women.
No, I definitely did not start here. It's been a long journey. I'm about to turn 65, so that tells you how long the journey has been.
Love it.
I got to first acknowledge my parents. I am the daughter of Chinese immigrants. My parents came here right after the war. In 1949, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. Grew up in the Midwest as sort of like the only Chinese kid on my East suburban Cleveland, Ohio existence, which I think sort of prepared me, right, for this kind of being the only woman, the only person of color in so many settings. Right after college, actually, I found myself in Illinois in Springfield working for state government, but right at the moment of the Equal Rights Amendment and all of the activity there. And that's, I think, what being in the right place at the right time turned me into a feminist and taught me about organizing, taught me about, how to organize 100,000 person marches down the streets of Chicago, which is what we did back then. But then I actually went to law school. So the thing that people don't actually remember about my background is, Zinclay, I spent 2 decades as a corporate lawyer, working for one of the biggest law firms in the world at the time, Skadden Arps. Doing that by day and actually learning that. It was tough, it was hard, but solving problems was something I loved doing. But my extracurriculars, my night job, was to stay in touch with women's issues and pro-choice issues and progressive candidates. And then in between there, I was also being a single mom at the time. So juggling all those things is something I'm familiar with, but passionate about, because doing what I called my extracurricular work is what kept me in touch with my passion, while I was also making a living as a single mom for my kids and making a career for myself in the law.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that beyond your professional experiences, you were a single mom. And I know that a lot of the work of Time's Up focuses on equity within the workplace. And I've heard from a lot of activists amid the pandemic concern about the impact it's going to have specifically on women, given how often they bear the brunt when it comes to childcare and education, now that so much learning is happening virtually. What have you heard about this? What is Time's Up doing in regards to how the pandemic is impacting gender equity?
Oh, no, it's critical, Zinclay. I mean, remember, at Time's Up, we were formed out of the moment of combating sexual harassment, right, in the post-Harvey Weinstein moment. But we also know, in addition to supporting survivors, we don't just want to pick the pieces up after sexual harassment happens. The goal is to create workplaces where it never happens. And that means we've got to create safe, equitable, and fair work for everyone. And so, that means addressing all of these issues like caregiving, like all the structural barriers that keep women from work. And what we're seeing right now is the struggles that working women have had for generations are laid bare for everyone to see in this pandemic and are having potentially devastating effects on undoing really literally decades of progress that women have made in participating in the labor force. In the September jobs report, Zinclay, it shows that 886,000 women over the age of 20 have dropped out of the workforce, according to the September job report, as against 200,000 men, right? Because women, and nearly half of them are Black and Latinx women, right? So women, and especially women of color, are bearing the brunt of this pandemic and are bearing the brunt of having no schools open, childcare centers closed, no paid leave, no paid sick leave, and inability to figure out how are they going to care for their children and stay in the workforce. And those are the structural barriers that we have got to address going forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's powerful that you mentioned how Time's Up began, right, in response to just like a collective movement that we saw. So what do you say now? I mean, we've seen so many protests this year. What do you say to people? How do you turn this momentum, this protest momentum, into practical organization? What have been your biggest learnings? What do organizers and advocates need to know about really creating some institutional change?
Well, first we've got to tell those stories, right? See the impact of what public policy change, what change within companies means, and how that will translate to the issues that people care about and are in the streets protesting about. So how a change in local government really is the thing that will affect what the investments are in our social safety net, as against policing, for example. What the public policy changes are that we need to have paid leave, to have childcare, to have caregivers actually receive a living wage. And then actually right now, because we are on the verge of the most important election of our lives, translating that, what people need to see in their lives right now, to this particular moment, because this is a unique moment where people are angry or frustrated or worried about their next paycheck. This is a moment where every single citizen in this country has the power to do something about it, and that is to go vote.
And we've heard a lot of people like yourself calling for people to vote. But I'd love to know, beyond voting, what did the conversations practically look like for forming Time's Up? Was it over coffee? Were you on the streets together at the Women's March and you said, you know what, we need to do this? Like, what did it practically, tangibly look like?
So it's interesting you're asking, Clay, because the story of the creation of Time's Up is really both unique, but I give so much credit to the women who were in the room, and it wasn't me. What happened was, in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein reporting in the New York Times, the New Yorker, almost exactly 3 years ago, right? This month in October, is when they first appeared. And that was the moment in which all of these women in Hollywood who had thought they were alone realized they weren't alone, right? And came together first just to support each other, but to their credit, very quickly went to turn their pain into action. And more than that, Sinclair, they wanted to actually reach out beyond their own industry. They realized that they were women who had some power and privilege, and they wanted to use it to actually address the experiences of farm worker women, of hotel clerks, right? Of, people who are just, working on the shop floors of our manufacturing industries, women who didn't have that power. And that's what led both to the creation of Time's Up and our first project, the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund.
To the point also, you mentioned the 2020 election. We know that Kamala Harris is on the ticket, and you're no stranger to working closely with a woman of color in the public eye. I'm thinking of First Lady Michelle Obama. What work is Time's Up doing, and what do you say about the double standard that so often women face in politics, but especially women of color? How are you combating that actively in this moment?
Well, we have been very active on this. Actually, we started a project called We Have Her Back. And you can actually text the words "her back" to 30644 to join this and learn more about it. We actually started it before we knew who the woman VP nominee was going to be, because we had actually seen this before. We knew it was going to be a woman. We knew she was going to be subjected to all forms of sort of sexist and misogynistic attacks. And so, several of us launched it with a memo to newsrooms, right? Like to Now This, saying we're going to watch for this. We're going to watch for that kind of coverage. And I will tell you, Zinclay, the other reason I'm so passionate about this is, the kind of discourse that we're having in the political sphere is so pervasive that it infects every other part of our culture, right? It shapes how we think about women leaders, not just as political leaders, but as business leaders or as leaders in our community. I think it contributes to the reason why there is not a single Black woman CEO in the Fortune 500 today. It's 2020. There's not a single one. And that's because this kind of language, this kind of treatment of women of color in power so infects every part of how we're thinking about it. It's what our children are listening to. So it shapes, how little girls think about their possibilities, how little boys will treat them as they grow up. So we've got to call it out. We've got to change our culture.
That's really powerful. And I think to end, I do want to ask you, knowing all of that, right? You said discourse. The discourse in our country right now is difficult and turbulent. So knowing all that, the theme of today's conference and the few days that we're in is show up. So looking ahead, how can we collectively show up in a way that affirms that women and girls deserve equity and deserve a seat at the table, deserve representation, and deserve to lead?
Well, I think, we show up by, number one, like in We Have Her Back, speaking out when something wrong is getting said, right? Don't just neutrally report the president, said this, right? Say it was wrong. It was racist. That was what, is going on there. Call it out for what it is. And number two, everyone, women and men, need to show up for women in leadership. Support them, speak out. The most powerful thing is when a white man actually speaks out in support and backs up a woman of color, striving to be a CEO, striving to be the manager of the restaurant in which she works in, right? Show up in your everyday lives by standing up for the women around you, for the women who are sort of the little girls who are speaking out. Show up for them, support them, lift them up. Whether you do it on your social media or you just do it in sending a kind note to someone as who's struggling along the way. I think that's what we need to do. And times are tough. It's all tough for everybody right now. So the idea of showing up in big ways and in small ways right now could not be more important as we see our way through this sort of election and through getting through this pandemic and these crises we're in.
Absolutely. Well, Tina, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and your learnings and for making the time. It was so great to chat with you again.
Oh, it was great to see you in play, and I hope you are safe and doing well.
Yeah, same to you. Stay well, everyone, and thanks so much for watching.